There is something about the United States in the 1960s that just sticks with you. The neighborhoods, the family rituals, the way people treated each other. And if you grew up then, you'll know exactly what I mean. I'm talking about a time when America was riding high on post-war prosperity, when families could afford a house on one income, when kids played outside until the streetlights came on, and when your neighbors weren't just people next door, they were like extended family. This was the decade that gave us the moon landing triumph, landmark civil rights victories, the explosion of rock and roll and Motown, and a sense that anything was possible. The war was behind us, the future looked bright, and being American meant something special. If you lived in an American city or town in the 1960s, maybe a new suburb like Levittown outside New York, a growing neighborhood in the Midwest, or a sunny street in California, you knew your neighbors. Not just their names, but their kids' names, what time they left for work, and whether they took sugar in their coffee. Fences between houses were low, maybe 3 feet high, specifically so people could chat over them while hanging laundry or tending to their gardens. Nobody felt the need to hide behind tall privacy fences because there was nothing to hide from. One viewer remembers how her mother would borrow a cup of sugar from Mrs. Johnson next door, and Mrs. Johnson would send back not just the sugar, but also fresh apple pie she'd baked that morning. That's just how things worked. People looked out for each other without being asked. Community meant something real back then. If someone on your street got sick, meals would appear on their doorstep without anyone organizing it. If it snowed overnight, neighbors would help each other shovel driveways before heading to work. Kids could knock on any door on the block if they needed help, and parents trusted that their children were safe playing streets away from home. There was this understanding that everyone was responsible for everyone else, not just their own family. That sense of collective care created neighborhoods that felt less like random houses grouped together and more like actual communities where people genuinely cared about each other's well-being. And speaking of kids playing in the streets, childhood in 1960s America was completely different from today. Parents would send their children outside after breakfast, and the only rule was to come home when the streetlights turned on. No cell phones to check in, no constant supervision, just pure freedom to explore, create, and play. Kids would build forts in the woods, play stickball or touch football until someone's mom called them for dinner, ride bikes all over town, and create their own entertainment without any adult input. Boredom wasn't something to be fixed immediately with a screen or organized activity. Boredom was the starting point for imagination and creativity. One viewer shared how he and his friends would take their sleds to the biggest hill in town during winter, spending entire Saturdays going up and down that hill until their clothes were soaked through and their faces were red from cold. Nobody worried about liability or safety equipment beyond a warm coat and boots. Parents understood that kids might fall, might get bruises, might come home dirty and exhausted, and that was all part of growing up. The freedom to take small risks and learn from them was considered essential to childhood, not something to be prevented at all costs. Now, let's talk about something that defined American identity in the 1960s more than almost anything else. July 20th, 1969. That's when Americans walked on the moon. This wasn't just a scientific achievement. This was America saying, "We can do the impossible." It was the culmination of the space race, a symbol of American ingenuity, determination, and leadership. When Neil Armstrong took that first step and said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," millions of American families watched together on their living room televisions. Something shifted in the national consciousness. We had done it. We had reached the moon. That same spirit of American achievement and optimism showed up in other ways too. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were landmark victories that aimed to make the promise of equality real for all Americans. The March on Washington in 1963 and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech became defining moments of the decade. For many, especially young people, it felt like America was finally living up to its ideals of justice and opportunity. The 1960s also brought huge growth in the middle class and suburban expansion. Developments like Levittown sprang up around major cities. Young families could buy a new three-bedroom house with a backyard and a driveway. A single income could usually cover the mortgage, groceries, a car payment, and still leave some money left over. In the 1960s, a single income could support an entire family comfortably. A factory worker, a teacher, a clerk at the bank, any of these jobs paid enough that one parent, usually the father, could work, while the other parent, usually the mother, managed the household and raised the children. Houses were affordable. A young couple could save for a down payment within a few years and get a mortgage that didn't consume their entire paycheck. The average house in many American cities in 1960 cost around $12,000 to $16,000. The average family income was about $5,000 to $6,000 a year. Do that math compared to today, and you'll see why people talk about the 1960s as a time of real economic opportunity. Jobs were plentiful too. You could walk into a factory, a store, an office, and often start working the same week. Apprenticeships were common, giving young people without college degrees a path to skilled trades and good careers. There was this sense that if you were willing to work hard, you could build a good life for yourself and your family. The anxiety that defines so much of modern working life, the constant worry about job security, the need for multiple income streams, the impossibility of affording a home, those weren't major concerns for most working Americans in the 1960s. Life felt manageable, and the future felt secure. The music and culture of 1960s America deserves its own conversation. American artists and bands were creating the soundtrack of a generation. The Beach Boys from California defined the sound of surf and sun. Motown artists like the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, and Stevie Wonder brought soul and rhythm and blues to the top of the charts. Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, and the folk movement gave voice to social change. The Beatles may have been British, but America quickly embraced them and then created its own rock explosion with bands like The Doors, Jefferson Airplane, and Jimi Hendrix. Television brought families together in ways that seem almost foreign now. Shows like Leave It to Beaver, The Andy Griffith Show, The Dick Van Dyke Show, and later Star Trek and the Beverly Hillbillies reflected and shaped American family life. Saturday mornings meant cartoons for the kids. Sunday nights often meant The Ed Sullivan Show, where millions watched the Beatles' debut in 1964 or saw Elvis Presley perform. Shopping in the 1960s meant going to actual stores, often multiple stores, to get what you needed. There was no Amazon, no online ordering, no big box stores that sold everything under one roof. You went to the butcher for meat, the baker for bread, the grocer for produce and canned goods. Department stores like Macy's, Sears, and Montgomery Ward were major destinations, places where families would spend Saturday afternoons browsing through different departments, maybe stopping at the lunch counter for a burger and a milkshake. These shopping trips weren't just about buying things. They were social experiences, chances to see people from your community, to chat with shopkeepers who knew you by name, to make an afternoon of something that today takes 30 seconds on a phone. Downtown areas were vibrant and alive. Main streets in American towns and cities were lined with locally owned businesses, movie theaters, diners, and shops. People would dress up to go downtown, making it an event rather than a chore. The streets would be busy with people walking, talking, window shopping, meeting friends for coffee. There was this energy to downtown areas, the sense of community gathering spaces where people from all parts of town would cross paths and interact. Transportation was different too, and it shaped how people experienced their communities. Many families in the early 1960s had just one car, usually the big American-made sedan Dad drove to work. People walked more, took buses or streetcars more, rode bikes more. Kids would walk or bike to school even in bad weather. Nobody thought twice about it. Walking was just how you got places, and it meant you were more connected to your neighborhood, more aware of the small details and changes, more likely to run into people and have spontaneous conversations. By the end of the 1960s, two-car households were becoming common, and that changed the landscape, literally and figuratively. Suburbs expanded as families could live farther from where they worked. Drive-in movies became popular date spots and family outings. Interstate highways connected cities and regions in new ways. The car represented freedom and possibility, The ability to take road trips across America, to visit national parks, to see family in other states. Trust and safety were different too. People didn't lock their doors during the day. Sometimes they didn't even lock them at night. Kids could roam freely without parents worrying about their safety. You could leave your bike outside a store and expect it to still be there when you came out. This wasn't naivete. Crime existed in the 1960s, of course it did. But the level of casual trust that people had in their neighbors and their communities was fundamentally different from today. Another viewer shared a memory that perfectly captures this era. She remembers how the milkman would deliver glass bottles to their doorstep every morning before anyone woke up, and sometimes her mother would leave a note asking for an extra bottle of cream or a dozen eggs along with the money. The milkman would read the note, leave what was requested, take the money, and leave change if needed, all based on trust. With no security cameras, no tracking, no verification systems, just one person trusting another to be honest and fair. Education in the 1960s also reflected different priorities and possibilities. Class sizes were often smaller than today in many places. Teachers had more authority and faced less bureaucracy. Discipline was stricter, expectations were clear, and students generally respected their teachers in the learning environment. College was becoming more accessible. State universities were expanding, and tuition costs were a fraction of what they are now. You could work a summer job and pay for a good portion of a year of college. Student debt wasn't the massive burden it has become. Now, it's important to be honest that not everything about 1960s America was perfect. This was still a time when women faced significant barriers in the workplace and society. African Americans and other minorities dealt with systematic discrimination and violence. The Vietnam War deeply divided the country. The point isn't to idealize the past or ignore the problems that existed. It's about understanding what was different, what worked, what created the strong sense of community and opportunity that many people remember from this era, and maybe what lessons we can take from that time to make our own communities stronger today. What stands out most when you listen to people talk about 1960s America is the optimism, the sense that tomorrow would be better than today, that hard work would pay off, that their children would have even better opportunities than they did. America was changing rapidly, becoming more diverse, more assertive, more modern. The economy was growing. The middle class was expanding. Major social programs and civil rights legislation were being passed, and the country was reaching for the stars, literally. This was the America of the 1960s, a place where community mattered a great deal, where people trusted each other and looked out for each other, where a decent life was accessible to most working families, where kids had freedom to explore and grow, where downtowns were still vibrant gathering places, where optimism about the future was the default setting. It wasn't perfect, but it was different in ways that shaped an entire generation's understanding of what community and country could be. The neighborhoods, the rituals, the way people treated each other. These weren't just nice extras that made life pleasant. They were fundamental to how society functioned, how people understood their place in their communities, how they thought about their responsibilities to each other. Looking back at 1960s America isn't about wanting to reverse progress or ignore the genuine problems that existed. It's about understanding what we've gained and what we've lost, and maybe thinking about what parts of that earlier America we might want to reclaim or reimagine for our own time. If this brought back memories, subscribe to keep exploring America.